We're going to move on now to Tom F. Rodgers, who is the president of the Space Transportation Association and is chairman of the Software Foundation, a physicist and an electronics engineer. Mr. Rodgers is also chairman of the Aerospace Research and Development Policy Committee of the IEEE. And Tom Rodgers is going to speak to us on some other non-technical aspects of cheap access to space. Thank you.
Well, with a paralytic introduction of that kind, I better start with someone more dulcet. So, you people know what Adam said to Eve as they left the Garden of Eden? No. What did? We appear to be living in an age of transition. Were any of you in the earlier session, the 8 o'clock session this morning? Like living in a different world. You couldn't believe that what was said at 8 o'clock would be said in the same general context as what's been said here so far this morning. I'd like to make one thing clear. I'm associated with a number of organizations and activities in that great city of always precision. But I'd like to be thought of this morning clearly as speaking for my foundation, because I'm going to speak about some rather unusual things and some sensitive things. You should know that they represent only my personal, carefully thought out and probably correct another dulcet introduction. I ran across something I hadn't seen in a long, long time, not so long ago, which brought to these thin lips for a second a smile. I remember it. There we go. Have you ever heard of the principle of the dangerous precedent? How to come here more often. The principle reads as follows. Nothing should ever be done for the first time. Now, a year ago, when I was attracted to enter the space transportation universe, I was taken by two things. One, the absolute necessity of modernizing our vehicles, and the second, the beginnings of hope that technologically and operationally people will begin to think about the correct things. And from what Rick has said, particularly Byron has said, and what Bill will say, you'll hear about practical possibilities, at least technologically and operationally, of having fully reusable vehicle fleets that will operate in airline-like fashion, and that is clearly the way that we must go. The civil space area is a very mixed bag. By the way, anybody that says the space program in my presence is going to get shafted. We have 3 space area activities. Military, which by and large is in pretty good shape, relatively. We have the commercial sector in the information areas, communications, position fixing, navigation, booming, new ideas, investments, great ideas, new services. And then we have what most people call the program, which means the federally managed, publicly funded civil space program. That's a very, very great character. It is hanging on, and I don't think very many people, my judgment, understand, let alone appreciate, that it is hanging on by its institutional fingernails. It's off the chart. Some of you heard me speak to this yesterday. I think that's not. I'd like to come back to that and say, we must have change. We must do some things for the first time. And I'm going to simply assume that the technological, operational, fully reusable airline-like things could be brought into existence if we have other changes. I'm going to step my way through 5 changes that I believe will have to come about in order to see them. First of all, markets. We must have much larger space payload markets than we have today. The United States government launches about, and we bring some back, 500,000 pounds per year. There's about another 100,000 pounds per year in the commercial and international market. If you take the cost of the acquisition of a new vehicle fleet and you amortize these costs over the lifetime of the fleet, and you divide that by 500,000 pounds, you go out and have a couple of martinis. It's very, very difficult to justify on the basis of the cost on 500,000 pounds a year the acquisition of the fleet. So we must have large, large markets. Well, what are they? It turns out we are faced with a classical situation here. To this day, I don't know how we decided to manufacture large numbers of automobiles without highways and gasoline stations, or how to put in highways and gasoline stations without having large numbers of automobiles. But that's where we are. We must have large markets, and this means that we must think very imaginatively about economically related things that could go on in space with great potential, so that the people working on the space transportation possibilities will feel encouraged. And the converse also is true. You can't think of doing things in space at $10,000 a pound, realistically, unless you're the government, and it's in trouble, unless you get the cost. So one of the very first things that we have to do is to face the question of much larger markets and set about inducing them, understanding them, articulating them, inducing them. Second, short of the moon, there's no place to go to stay. A place to reside, a place to work, a place to enjoy yourself. We go up and spend a week sometimes, but you know, that means that every trip is a cruise ship. And we've got to have, in low Earth orbit, large amounts of low unit cost, habitable body. Imagine the air transportation industry. Suppose we went to United Airlines, American Airlines, and said, all the hotels in the country are going to close down. Anybody that's traveling must be traveling from his or her home to somebody else's. A shock, real shock. We must have in LEO, low unit cost, habitable body, residents, work, or whatever. That's part of the space transportation picture. It must not be overlooked by people working on the vehicles. And wax just, you know, this is a space crowd, so I'll just wax and describe it in other terms. We must have the Azore Islands for sure. We must have the Canary Islands for sure. You read about Columbus going back and forth and everybody else. They always stopped off, going over, and stopped off, coming back. So if we want to go out and go to Mars or wherever, we need to have the Azore. Third, finance. This is a personal judgment. I think it's going to be some considerable time before the friendly federal government puts up the money required to build a new vehicle fleet. I could be incorrect. I could be incorrect. But I'm trying to picture who it will be in the Department of Defense, or in NASA, or in the White House, who will stand up in the midst of all of today's debt, deficit, and social contact and say, what this country needs is another rocket. I could be wrong. But I'm a private investor, and what I do in thinking about this is to say, there are other rooms in the country like this, so to speak, in which people are doing the reciprocal of what we're doing here. Here we're saying we have all these great potentials for doing things. We've got to develop these technologies. We've got to, we don't have any money. There are other meetings, and I've been to one or two in my lifetime being a private investor. I don't find too much fun. People hold meetings like this saying, We're ass deep in money. We can get it for 3%, you know. You people in the savings bank, you want to invest it and make 15. Where are all the good ideas? Where's all the places that we can get a fine return on that money? One of the greatest impedance transformation mysteries of the world. But I would simply say this: I do believe that we can explore usefully, and I would suggest prudently, the private financing of new vehicle fleets in public-private partnerships in which the purchasing power of the federal government, not the engineers, but the purchasing power, not the operators, the purchasing power is used to bankroll the acquisition of the new vehicle fleets. And if you look in the NASA Authorization Act for 1993, you will find now legitimized the notion of the federal government acting as a so-called anchor tenant, of saying that we want to see these things go on in and about space, and if somebody comes to us with sound ideas about how to do it, and there's a commercial prospect there, and an industrial prospect, and maybe get the cost down, then we now not only may, but we are instructed we should say that in our case, the payloads could be government payloads to a very great extent. And when we do enough of that and work off the acquisition costs, and then the unit costs come down, then we are off to the races. So I simply repeat, I think we must begin to think creatively about private sector financing. Acquisition. On this I feel very strong. I believe the record is absolutely clear. The governments cannot be asked to reduce the cost of anything. Now, I don't say that in any ideological form. I'm reminded of what one of my philosophy professors told me many years ago. He said, Tom, don't blame the dog for barking. After all, that's what dogs do. If you want to stop the noise, don't take it out on the dog. Solve the problem. When you see how the White House and the Congress work, you see that the logics which they use are political logics. They are not economic logics. And if we, and I do submit that we're on firm ground, say that the future of space requires that basic space infrastructure be dropped in unit cost by at least 1 and hopefully 2 orders of magnitude, then we must use economic logics, not political logics. In the same article in Aviation Week that I believe Byron referred to about Boeing saying that we'd be interested in exploring the matter of another vehicle, they said that if we could develop a supersonic transport as the first stage, this would continue to keep a large number of engineers employed. And they further said that in order to help get the political consensus, we could imagine the contracts being spread around the country. Absolutely correct, very useful, first order in political terms. Another space station. Another space station. So I would submit to you that the space infrastructure of the country now, after 35 years of experience, the government took the shock, it took the heat, it spent the money, it made the mistakes, we had the disasters, we had the successes. Now, after nearly 2 generations, it's time to turn to the private sector in an economic, not a political context, for obtaining the next generation, and from now on, basic space infrastructure. Now, that doesn't mean for a moment that the government doesn't have a role for doing a lot of technology development that will address improving the economic posture of the space transportation and doing an awful lot of other things. Although I must say what they're doing now is just beggars description. But what we should be thinking of, economic context, not political context. And let me elaborate on that just a bit by drawing your attention to an analogy. I've talked to some congressmen who say to me, Mr. Rodgers, somebody says it should be vertical takeoff, vertical land. Somebody should say it's two-stage democracy. Somebody say, how the hell can I make a decision like that? I mean, first of all, I'm voting against me, I'm a lawyer. How can I possibly? Very, very difficult to say. Just think of it for a second. You know, we say, why don't they? But position yourself. Put yourself in the Space Committee on the House or Senate side with your backup, all the other things you have to think about and be concerned about. How do you decide whether or not? Very difficult. Now the analogy is as follows. Back when I had air, I was in the satellite communications R&D business. And we now see the satellite communications business going like gangbusters. But then, the question was, well, should we be low altitude, medium altitude, stationary altitude? Should it be television capacity or voice capacity? Should the repeaters be active or passive? Remember that? We had the ecosphere up there. You remember that? Well, all the same kinds of problems. And the senators and representatives were saying, gee, should it be active or passive? What the hell do I know? You know, history, just look back. That's the nice thing about having something like, you know, I'm only 50, but I can go back. So at one point it became important to transfer from political considerations to economic considerations. And there was created the ComSat Act of 1962. And then it all began to fall into place. Because then we had something that we don't have in the space transportation business. We had somebody responsible for delivering a service. Not delivering a satellite, but delivering communication services. And so these people in time began to say, well, Hughes, can you build a satellite in 4 years? Oh, it's going to take 6? We'll call you. Go to L'Oreal, whoever it was, Ford at that time, and say, can you build it for $60 million? Oh, it's 80. We'll call you. And they kept going about and going about and going about. And gradually, you know, they had a way of arriving at a judgment that is internally coherent. It said, how do I make money? How do I get rich? In order to make money and get rich, I've got to provide services that people will use. More and more services at a price which, when I bring back, beats my cost and gives a profit. I want more profit. And so I keep thinking more and more, how do I get the cost down? How do I improve the service? And so all the political guys, we don't hear the Congress anymore sweating the problem. Should we be a geostation? That's what we've got to do. We've got to think now of ways by which the acquisition process gets put into an economic context. Now the last thing, and by the way, I love everybody. You should understand that, I really do. I'm not calling America's sweetheart for nothing. I put in 4 of the happiest years of my life in the office of the Secretary of Defense. And that's the only lie I've ever told. I've been on the NASA Space Program Advisory Council, a near infinite series of civil space-related boards, groups, and so on. But there's no money. We got a Department of Defense who displayed extraordinary prowess in the Iraqi war, and now knows that if it can do some things differently, they can do it even better and at lesser cost. We have NASA, who until 3 or 4 months ago, in my view of the space transportation career, we're going to watch the train leave the station and not beyond it. Now, when I was on the 3rd floor, I had to get out of bed every morning and face the fact that I had to carry a piano up a spiral staircase, and it was tough. And all these 2 organizations have really got together and sort out their interests to the better of the American public in general. may not get it anywhere. But that's for sure is protected. Now, I'd like to go back to something that Byron alluded to, and that's Christopher Paul. Go all the way back to the very first thing. Market. Because the word market is much more important to the space business than just a matter of payloads. We, in the federal public-supported civil space area, are in extremely difficult circumstances because not enough of the leadership learn to listen. They're very good at talking, but they never learn to listen. And so I'll tell you a story. I think I told it one group yesterday. It goes like this. I was the director of research in the Department of Housing and Urban Development for a while, and I worked for the first black cabinet officer, Bob Weaver. And people afterwards tell me it used to be funny to watch both of us talking because, you know, one was for Mars and one was for Jupiter. It's absolutely, we couldn't have been any more different in our views of the universe, our senses of facts, and proportions. He was the quintessential political animal. And the first thing he did after the first great sectorial lecture that I gave was he said, Tom, please don't try to help me. He said, help me to keep, don't just, I'm losing. Stop me from losing. Don't try to get, so we got going pretty far. Now I went to see him about 4 years ago in New York. He's getting on with it now. And we talked about a serious and interesting housing political problem. We're all finished. He said, Tom, what the hell are you doing these days? I said, well, I got back into the space business a little bit. Space business. What do you know about it? And I told him about my drive was to see space opened up to the general public. He said, yeah. And I said, well, let me tell you 3 poles in the United States and one in the UK. They asked all the usual questions, and in these 3 poles, out of a near infinite number of poles, one final question was asked. The question was, what do you want about space? Not what do you think about what the government's doing, and what do you do with it? And the answer in those 4 polls was that 40 to 45% of the adult population said, I want to take a trip to space. Bob said, 80 people doing it. What's the government doing about it? And I said, no. Immediately knocked it into his plane and said, it was a political constituency of 80 million people, and the government's not doing anything about it. He said, go on space. Go ahead. And next morning at 7 o'clock, my phone rang. We apologized. I couldn't sleep all night long. There's a political constituency. So look, thinking about it as market is very, very important. We are the United States of America. If you have different forms of government, different cultural backgrounds, different historical precedents, you have different reasons that you can advance for why we should be in space. It all comes down to something very simple. American people are convinced. That's all. Let's not make a God of the federal project. We are who we are. We are the world's greatest and most highly respected, with all the warts and woes and mistakes, representative democracy in the history of the world. Recently had slaves. That's why I'm in space, because I want to see us, we people, in space. So we've got 2 things here: market, economics, space transportation, and the central theme for the United States of America in the civil space area: open up space to the general public. Now, one final specific, because you know, I'm a great oratorical talker, but I'd like to leave with a specific suggestion, and that is the shuttle fleet. It is an extraordinary instrument. There's no question about it. And it's devoted now, since several years ago after the disaster, when it was turned off from commercial things, to the conduct of basic research. We should reverse that, or not reverse it. We should amend that. What we need to do is to learn how to use the shuttle fleet to do things in addition to what they do for life scientists, physicists, Boolean algebra, and so on. We should learn to use it to conduct market-related research. We should use the shuttle fleet to learn about what's involved in getting large numbers of activities going on. We've got to learn to think big about space, not hoarsely about space. We can have the fleet, should have the fleet, probably at least another few decades. It should be used for conducting things of a market research. I enjoyed talking.
Thank you, Tom. Not a paralytic discussion.